necessity of confession in different situations. And that's a good point, because we do make a distinction, which is very scriptural, between different levels of sin. And this makes all the sense in the world, right? We know instinctively that adultery and murder is worse than gossip. We know this. I mean, this makes sense to us. Right? So we instinctively know these degrees of sin. And what the church has always taught is that a really serious sin, okay, which has to have various things involved with it, separates us from God. It actually severs that relationship, like we talked about, that relationship with God. That's the fundamental thing in the Christian life. There are certain sins that cut us off from that. And in those situations, which we call mortal sin, the church says you need to reconcile yourself with God through the sacrament of confession in a visible way in the church. For lesser sins, which we'll call venial sins, the sacrament is not necessarily required, but there's a great value. As I've said earlier, Pope John Paul II probably wasn't mortally sinning much, hopefully never, right? But he saw value in weekly confession. Why? Because of some of the things we've talked about. The visible nature of the sacrament, of getting out of yourself and having to have the humility to go before another person and be honest with yourself about where you stand before God. The value of guidance. If you find a good confessor, a priest who's good at counseling and can help you to learn different ways of overcoming your sin, there's a great value in the guidance part of the sacrament. There's a great value in, really fundamentally, just receiving the grace of the sacrament, of the help that Christ guarantees that attaches to that sacrament. So even in the case of lesser sins, which do not separate us or cut us off from our relationship with God, the sacrament is advised, it's encouraged, it's a beautiful way to grow closer to Him. So yeah, we want to keep that in mind, that the different levels of sin and how that works out with confession. Anybody else? Yeah.
I got a question. Hypothetically here, let's say like John, even if he didn't commit any sins, but was continuing to go every week, and however confession may go, you go to confession to make your sins, but John was not committing any sins. And would you just talk about past sins, or just kind of that?
Well, I think he would probably be the first to admit to you that he was probably committing some sins, probably not serious ones, which we call mortal, and that's kind of what I was referring to. That Pope John Paul II was probably not doing anything that was destroying this relationship between him and God, something very serious. And so, but I'm sure Pope John Paul II struggled with lesser sins. He probably struggled, who knows what he cried lesser sins that don't destroy that relationship, but still require the grace of God to overcome those temptations. This side of the grave, we're all going to struggle with things, right? This side of the grave, we're all going to have sinful inclinations and temptations. And so he would probably talk about those kind of things and continue just to confront them and work on them. Actually, I'm reminded of about 2 years ago, Pope Benedict had all the second graders in Rome who were making their first communion. He allowed them to come to the Vatican and sit in an audience, and then they could get up and ask any question of the Holy Father. Okay? And one little second grade girl says to the Holy Father, I don't understand why I have to keep going to confession when I confess the same things every time. And of course, it's a cute second grader saying this, right? And the Holy Father responds basically by saying, when you clean your room, he's talking about second grade, but it applies to us. When you clean your room, you clean the same places every time. weekly. When you clean your room weekly, you clean the same places, you do the same things every time. But if you didn't, the dirt would build up. And it was basically his way of saying in a very simple way to a second grader, and it's a great message for all of us, that there's a great value in consistent confession, because when we go a long period without confronting that sinfulness head on, which we really have to do in the sacrament, there's a good chance that we'll let the dirt build up in our soul. There's a good chance that we'll kind of blow off some of the problems we're having and some of the temptations we're getting into. And so I always use that because it's great not for kids, not just for kids, but for all of us to see the value of a confession, even if we haven't done something destructive to our soul. So, yeah.
How often would you recommend doing it?
Well, I don't want to say too much on that, other than the church requires it once a year. Okay, once a year, the church requires it. I think a general practice of monthly or every few months is a good thing. I mean, certainly weekly confession or bi-weekly confession as a devotional practice is a wonderful thing. But I would tend to go on the side of generally monthly.
I've heard not to go more than, well, I've heard not to like make a space like bi-weekly is kind of like as close as, you know,
Yeah.
to go weekly would almost like kind of like scruples and things like that.
Yeah, and that's a good point. If you are a very scrupulous, well, scrupulous is a different kind of thing, and you would approach somebody differently who has scruples than a person who doesn't think they have serious sin but wants to come to the sacrament to receive the graces and simply to confront their genuine sinfulness of that week. And I would have no problem with that. Scruples is a different kind of case where they're so obsessive about it that you almost want to tell them, don't come to the sacrament for a while. That's generally what confessors will advise for people with serious scruples. Will say, don't come for a while. Because they need to really soak in the idea of the love of God and that God isn't concerned if 20 minutes before Mass the food they ate 5 hours ago accidentally fell from their teeth and they broke the fast. I mean, that's what maybe a scrupulous person would confess. So, so there's, if any of you are like that, stay away from a little bit. But generally in our culture, scruples is not a problem we have. Usually we think we're not sinful at all. But yeah, I think monthly is a pretty good practice. Yeah.
You've given us the need for confession and given us why we need it. But after we confess and that amendment process in our life, do you have like any guideline ideas about how we make a full amendment in our lives? Or like for you, like how do you go about amending your life to truly try to follow that?
I think that's a good point. And I think one of the things we have to really work hard on in this is not patting ourselves on the back for doing all the good things that come easy to us. Okay, I brought a few books. I always like to bring books just because, I think they're great resources and, you can, this book, and I'll get back to your point in a second, this book's called Meeting Christ in the Sacraments. It's a wonderful book on the sacraments, and the chapter on confession is very good. This book is amazing. It's called Transformation in Christ by Dietrich von Hildebrand. It's a spiritual classic. And he has a whole chapter here on contrition. Okay. And then these are the sermons of Cardinal Newman, who was just beatified. Okay, and these are some sermons he gave, actually still as a Protestant minister, as an Anglican priest, before he converted to the Catholic Church. but they are unbelievable. And what reminded me of this was that he has a sermon on what he called, and the title of the sermon is Secret Faults. And what he says is we spend a lot of our life patting ourselves on the back for doing all the good things that come easy to us. So we look at another person, we say, man, that person struggles because they drink too much. And in the meantime, we've never had a real desire to drink much. So really, is that any kind of sacrifice to us? Or we look at somebody and we say, that person never stops talking about other people, right? But it's something that really has not been a strong temptation for us. And in doing all of that, Newman's point is, we distract ourselves from the little things that we really struggle with, because we tell ourselves, man, we're doing a heck of a job. And you may have the temptation to say, compared to a lot of these college kids out here, I'm a pretty good kid. I'm a pretty good guy. I don't do anything too bad. I occasionally do heroic things and make good choices. And really, I'm just a good guy. Well, the Lord doesn't call us to be good guys. The Lord calls us to perfection, to holiness. So I think one of the this isn't a direct answer, but it's a way of saying we spend a lot of our life deceiving ourselves and telling ourselves how good we are about everything. And what the key, I think, to really conversion and really to growing towards perfection is to find those things in our life that are the hardest for us. And those are the crosses we take up. Those are the crosses every day that are going to make the difference between a saint and a good guy. And we have if you talk to somebody about a person these days, that's all he's a really nice person. Well, that's great. But really, the Lord calls us to more than that. And so I think really the next step for people who are really trying their best to be faithful is to stop judging other people for what they struggle with and to find the things in your life that are the hardest. This one sin is the hardest thing in my life. That is the thing where the Lord's going to test you and where we prove our true faithfulness. So I would just say that Newman is worth reading any of these sermons. He punches you in the face. So if you don't like to be punched in the face, he's not the guy. But if you want to read one and by the end of the sermon say, I'm the worst human being, he's the guy. And we need a little of that. We're very affirmative as a culture, right? And that's a good thing, because we don't want low self-esteem or anything like that. But we have to confront our sinfulness, right? That's kind of, I guess, what the main point we're trying to make. You had to quit?
I kind of want to tackle what you said in terms of like things that help with, well, I think you're talking more reference like habitual sin.
Just like ideas for amendment. Like, I guess habitual sin would fall under that, but what I was trying to get at was when we fall into these sins, at times, I guess it does fall more under habitual sin. We go back to them. Right. How do we amend our lives in a good way that we no longer have to fall back on that?
What I would recommend, like this is what's worked for me, is that definitely find an accountability partner. Like somebody that's going to hold you accountable for what it is that you do. Like if you know, like you struggle with drinking, you say, hey, that you got your buddy that's going to call you every night and say, hey man, what are you doing? Then, by the way you answer the phone, he's going to know whether you've been drinking or not. If you struggle with things on the internet, get accountability software, and then there's going to be a report that's going to be emailed to your best friend. You want that best friend to think you walk on water. Whereas when the truth is you got a cinder block tied to your feet, you're sinning. That's what I had to do, because I had to tell my best friend, like, I had this issue, and I wanted to do my accountability.